The Falk is a small logging locomotive from the west coast of the US. It was built, I think, in about the 1890s, and it was very small, probably only weighing 5 to 7 tons. It was an 040 loco, but it had a gypsy winch on the front so that it could be used both as a locomotive to haul wagons and as a winch to winch logs along the railroad tracks and then load them onto the wagon. Although there are some plans available for it, but the plans are a sort of a rough approximation, and I've got some original drawings as well, and between the two I'm trying to build this locomotive. Other problems caused by this: the original drawings had castings made available by a firm in the United States. However, they suffered a disastrous fire, I think in the 1980s. The owner of the business was killed in the fire and all the patents were destroyed, so castings were no longer available. This left two options. One was to fabricate certain castings like the cylinders, and to make new patterns from which we could get the wheels cast. It wasn't thought viable to try and fabricate the wheels with the equipment I had. So I produced two patterns. Fortunately, both wheels use the same pattern, and these are the patterns here, which are made out of MDF board and bits of balsa, which are then painted and put together on a board for the foundry and joined by this runner here to carry the metal into both the patterns. This was sent to the foundry in Toowoomba to be cast. It took some months, but I eventually got some castings back. And we have here two of the rough-turned castings awaiting finishing. I got two sets of wheels cast in case there are any blowholes, but so far the castings have turned out fairly well. Now, the cylinder castings were a fairly simple casting, but as I said, no patterns were available, and I thought it would be just as simple to fabricate these out of brass and bronze. In the cylinder here, the cylinder itself, between these two rings on the end of the cylinders, is made of bronze, and the cylinder frame, as it were, and the steam chest is made out of brass. The cylinder covers are also made out of brass, with the gland made out of bronze to take the wear from the piston rod. There's no threaded glands on these. They will have two studs eventually with nuts to adjust the gland. The gland itself is Teflon, and in fact in this bronze cylinder, because cast iron rings don't work well with bronze, I've made split pistons, and on the split piston we have a ring made of Teflon, and it is loaded with a Viton O-ring under the Teflon ring. There's not much else to say about it at the moment. It's a work in progress, and this has then got to go on the chassis and have all the valve gear added to it. Here we have one of the split Teflon piston rings. The bore of these cylinders is about 1 inch, and so we have a Teflon ring that is split to allow some movement, and it is loaded internally with a Viton, which is a fluorocarbon type elastomer O-ring. Now, this sits in the groove in the piston. Actually, two rings fit within this piston ring, and when it is pushed into the bore, this elastomeric ring is compressed and spreads, and it provides a force that keeps the Teflon ring spread within the piston. Now, because you can't stretch either the Teflon ring or these Viton O-rings over the piston into the groove, because they won't stretch that far, then the piston had to be made in two halves and screwed together and then attached to the piston rod. This is a typical American bar frame type chassis. The axle boxes sit within these cutouts in the chassis. The cylinders are bolted either side onto the chassis at the front end here, and the driving axle is the rear axle in this case, but the valve gear is on the forward axle. And you can see here the eccentrics on the axle driving through these fabricated eccentric rods, the expansion links. It's all a bit stiff at the moment, and the next stage now is to make the proper axles, fit the wheels to the axles, and then we can fit the connecting rods and connect up the valve gear and get the valve timing right. There's still a long way to go with this locomotive, but it's a work in progress, as I said before. This is the boiler for the Falk locomotive. As you can see, it's quite small. The whole locomotive is only about 17 or 18 inches long, and for a 7¼ inch gauge loco, this is very tiny. The original design called for a steel boiler, but owing to the thickness of the plates and the small number of tubes and the method of firing with virtually a Primus type gas burner, picnic stove type gas burner, it didn't produce very much steam. So I decided that we'd be better to go to a copper boiler, and I produced this design myself, and at the moment I'm using it as a test boiler for injectors. It's fired by gas at present, but the locomotive will be fired on coal when it is completed. There's not too much else to say about this boiler at this time.
How long did it take you to make the boiler?
The boiler construction took about 1 year. The design, getting the design approved by the boiler inspectors probably took longer than it took to build the boiler itself. The boiler is a fairly simple boiler. There's no superheaters. It's just basically a pretty simple boiler. Minimal number of stays because the firebox isn't very big, but it's not, there wasn't an approved boiler design for this type of model. These are the commercial gears for which go on the winch on the front of the boiler. This is driven by a separate engine which sits on the side of the boiler. I was going to cut these myself, but it's, by the time you get castings for the blanks, it's just as cheap to buy the cut gears. These actually sit in about this location on the boiler. Today we're silver soldering up these two steam chests for a little loco, and they're made up out of brass bar, just screwed together with 8BA screws loosely so that the silver solder can penetrate the joints. So what we've got to do is get them hot, then turn them over so we'll do the bottom ends, because there's two joints. There's the joints up here and there's joints down there. So we'll do the bottom joints first, and then we'll come on, turn them over and do the top joints. We've got this steam chest is made out of pieces of brass bar, just lightly screwed together with 8DA brass screws. The joints are cleaned and fluxed, and now we've got to heat this up and get the silver solder to flow through. It's important not to tighten the screws too tight, or the silver solder won't penetrate the joint. Okay? In a minute I'm going to do one of the cylinder assemblies. They're going to take a bit more heating than those. We're now silver soldering the two support brackets onto this fabricated slide valve cylinder assembly, and this is quite a large lump of bronze, and it's going to take quite a while to heat it evenly through. You just don't want to heat it too quickly, you just got to let it evenly heat. It's all been cleaned and fluxed, so we've just got to let it get. It's really important not to get the torch too close to the job, otherwise the coal gas in the middle of the flame will just keep it too cool. That's it. And now we just got to wait for that. It'll take substantial time to cool. The silver solder has flowed as best I can see. I've got to be very careful here, otherwise the silver solder will flow into the passageways, and I don't want to block those. Now the steam chests have now cooled, and we're going to put them in the dilute sulfuric acid pickle for half a day.